All right. Hi, Jatin. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, Harshit. How are you doing?
All good. Thanks. Ready for the case?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Perfect. So let's jump straight into it. So, Jatin, your client has come up with a new variation of a cow feed, and they're planning to launch this in the Indian market, specifically in the state of Uttar Pradesh. And they now want your help in pricing this product at an optimal price.
All right. Harshit, so just to reiterate the objective, our client has come up with a new cow feed that they want to launch in the Indian market, specifically in Uttar Pradesh, and they want our help to figure out how to price the product. Am I
Yeah.
correct?
Yep.
Right. Harshit, can I just take a few moments to think of any clarifying questions that I might have?
Sure. Take it.
Sure. Right. Harshit, so I just want to start by understanding if our client has any specific objectives with respect to pricing the product, right? Is it to maybe capture more of a market share, or if in the short term the objective is purely to maximize profits?
So, the objective is not to maximize profits, but they, of course, want to cover their costs. They want
All
to,
right.
let's say, apply a certain margin over their costs and at least cover that kind of cost structure. And
All
but
right.
the major priority is to gain as much of a market share as possible.
All right. Got it. And I just want to get a sense of, what our client exactly does. So where are they based out of? Have they launched out of such a product in the Indian market before, or in any other market where they were operating prior to this?
Okay, so the client is based out of Sweden, and
All right.
this will be their first product for the Indian market, and specifically, and they've only made this product for the UP market. And coming on to whether they've launched this somewhere else or not, they're still in the process of launching this in several other countries, but they've not launched it in any other country so far.
All right, got it. And before I move on to maybe the different approaches to pricing this product, I just wanted to get a sense of, how is this product exactly perceived by the customers, right? Is it a commodity, or is there some level of differentiation that can exist?
So it is more of a commodity, right? It's a cow feed. So it's more of a
All right,
commodity, but we do have some extra value. I mean, we build the product that it offers extra value over, let's say, our competitors in the market. So we're trying to
got it.
differentiate it from the existing products.
Got it. Great. So maybe I can get into that later when I'm actually trying to price the product.
Sure.
So yeah, I think that answers my preliminary questions. I'll just take a few moments to think of the various approaches to pricing, if that's
Yep.
fine. All
Works.
right. Right. Harshit, so what I'm essentially thinking is that there are three approaches that we can take to pricing over here. There's a cost-based approach, which is basically going to give us the minimum threshold at which we have to price a product in order to make back the money that we've invested in this product.
All right.
Secondly, is a competitor-based approach, where essentially this will be the upper threshold that we can charge for a product, because beyond that pricing, probably the customer is going to switch to a competitor. And finally, is a value based approach, right? Where we actually try to maybe calculate the value that our product is adding to our end consumer, and therefore accordingly price our product.
All right.
So, so am I missing out on anything here? Do you think I can proceed?
No, I think this makes sense. This is exhaustive. Let's do one thing. Let's start with the cost-based
Sure.
pricing, and then we can move on to the other forms of pricing you've discussed.
All right, great.
Yeah.
So for cost, Harshit, I think there are essentially two costs that we will have to factor in. One is the variable cost
Okay.
that will be basically on a per product basis with every unit that we sell. And secondly, could be any investment cost or any fixed cost that that we've essentially occurred in developing the product. So this could be the R&D cost. It could be the cost of setting up the manufacturing unit and all other costs along the value chain.
All right.
So, in this case, do we know what these costs look like for a product in question?
Okay. So I'll just cover fixed costs. So like you said, we've incurred a significant R&D cost to let's say basically give this, let's say come up with a certain product, right, and add that extra value. But for the purpose of this case, let's just look at variable costs. We can leave the fixed costs aside and only price our product so that we can cover our variable costs. Uh, Based on your understanding, could you quickly gauge what the variable cost would be in supplying this product to our consumers?
Sure, I'll just take a moment to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So, Harshit, I think the way that I look at the variable cost would essentially to be look at the value chain of the product and try to see what components of the cost are variable and then essentially add them up. So,
Okay.
I'll start with production and I'll look at the cost of inputs essentially for every unit of product. Then
Mhm.
for distribution, I'll maybe look at the cost of transporting the product to the end consumer or to the distributors if that is the distribution model that we're following.
All
And
right.
finally, I look at the cost of pulling the customer to us. So this will include all sorts of promotion cost and maybe after services cost. And
Okay.
basically, the variable components in all of these three steps, I'll add up to come up with the variable cost number.
All right. So you starting with production, and then okay, you'll have some distribution cost to the end consumers. I would assume that you'll also have some retailing costs, which I think you can cover under distribution. That's fine. And then
Yes,
you'll have
yes,
obviously
correct,
marketing costs because it's a new product, so you'll have to generate a lot of awareness within the customers. Fair.
correct,
So
correct.
that makes sense. I think based on our understanding, one of the biggest challenges will be the distribution costs, right? Because
Right,
penetrating a market like Uttar Pradesh in smaller rural areas will be a challenge in terms of a last mile cost, right? So that
right.
will be a major cost burden. All right. So let's assume that all of kind of summing up all these costs across the value chain, we arrive at a cost. We are incurring a cost per product of about rupees 1,000 cost per
All right,
unit.
got it,
Yeah.
got it. Right. So, Harsh, essentially, if the variable cost that we're incurring per unit of product is 1,000, that essentially would give me the minimum threshold, right, at which I have to basically sell the product in order for it for this to be a viable proposition for me.
Okay.
Now, what I'll further try to do is maybe look at the price at which the competitor is supplying this product in the market and see if the value that we've come up with is lower or higher than that, right? To see if this is a viable offering for the customer.
Okay.
So
So
would that be fine?
all right. So you will basically cover this cost at least, the rupees 1,000, and now you're moving on to the competitor pricing, right?
Yes, correct.
You also want to look at something else as a minimum threshold because 1,000 will just cover our costs.
Right, right. So I think one thing that maybe we can include over here is maybe a certain profitability threshold that the company has set for itself.
Okay.
So maybe we can include that also to the price of the product because yeah, you're right. Like if you're just covering a cost, we might not want to do this.
Perfect.
So do
Sounds
we
good.
have such a threshold in mind?
Right. So internally, I think we've set a target of about 10% margin over and above the cost we're incurring, over the variable cost, like we discussed.
All right, got it. So for a 10% margin, I think the selling price would approximate, not exactly, but approximately be around 1100. So maybe that I can consider to be the minimum threshold. That's fine.
Perfect. Sounds good. Let's move on.
All right, great. Right. So the second thing that I'll be looking at is the competitor-based pricing. Now, for this, I just like to get a sense of what the competitive landscape is like over here, right? So, do we have any other major competitors, and do we know the price points at which they're currently selling in the market?
Okay. So while we have, let's say, two or three other competitors, but
Yeah.
let's say most of them are small competitors that we're not really concerned about. But there is one competitor who is large enough and they sell their product at rupees 950 per bag of coffee.
All right, got it. Uh, right. So that's helpful, Harshit. And given that the threshold that we set for ourselves is 1100, it tells me that if our product is exactly the same as a competitor, we might not be able to capture the market share, which is the objective that we set for ourselves.
Okay.
So, at firstly, try and understand if there is any differentiation, right, in our product, which would maybe compel the customer to choose our product over our competitors. So I would like to think of this differentiation in two regards.
Okay.
Firstly, is maybe the quantity of the product that we're offering,
Mhm.
and secondly, is the quality of the product.
Okay.
Uh, right. So, in terms of the quantity of the product, do we know like per unit what is the quantity that our competitor is selling vis-a-vis what we're selling, and if there's any difference over there?
No, so in terms of quantity, I think it's pretty much the same. Uh, the quantity we sell per bag is the same as the quantity the competitor sells bag. And let's
All
say,
right.
just to share with you some information, one bag typically lasts for 30 days for both us and
All
for
right.
the competitor. So
All
there's no
right. Got it.
limitation in terms of the quantity.
Got it. Fair enough. So, in terms of the quality, I'd firstly like to maybe think of the parameters in which on which the quality of a cow feed bag would be judged, right? So,
Okay,
given this is a B2B product, I would think that whatever basically allows the cow to be more economically productive
okay,
would essentially define whether a particular product is of a higher quality or not.
okay,
So, if I think of a cow, I think I would typically think of the how much milk the cow is essentially being able to produce.
okay,
Right. So, do we know if like our feed essentially leads to any higher value, higher volume of milk production vis-a-vis maybe say the feed of our competitors?
okay. Great. So, Jatin, you're correct. We've observed an increase in the milk yield using our product, right? So our company carried out certain experiments, and we've observed that vis-a-vis, let's say, other competitors or other competitors' products in the market, our cow feed enables the cow to give, let's say, maybe 6 liters of milk extra per 10 days.
All right.
And
Got it.
in addition to that, we've
Yeah.
also observed that in terms of value, particularly in terms of, let's say, just a quantitative value, we've also observed that a cow feed enables the cow to have a shinier fur.
All right.
Yeah.
Got it. Right. Harshit, so that's helpful. So I think before I maybe proceed to understanding, quantitatively how much the additional milk production is worth to us, I'd
Yeah.
just like to get a sense of, what exactly is maybe the economic value that a shinier fur adds to a cow, right? Do
Okay.
we have any measure as to whether this would be beneficial to the farmer or not?
So if we look at it, we don't have a quantitative estimate, but let's say, what do you think would be the qualitative estimate if you were to, let's say, think about what economic value would a shinier fur add, if any?
Right. So I think there are two ways to think about this. One would be while the cow is alive, and the second would be when the cow is not alive.
Okay.
So when the cow is alive, again, there might be maybe a value to there might be a market for the fur of the cow. Although I haven't heard of such a market,
Okay.
there might be one. And secondly, it could be when the cow is actually dead. Right? Maybe the carcass of the cow might be worth slightly more if the fur is shinier.
All right. I think that seems exhaustive. You're right. I mean, when the cow is alive, if there is, let's say, a system where you could sell or buy, there's a market where you sell and buy cows, maybe the value is higher. And when it's dead, maybe the value is again higher when they're dead, right? In another
Fair.
market. Fair. But for the purpose of this case, let's ignore that. Let's only try to estimate the price using the quantitative estimate we have of the milk yield.
Great. Right, Harsha. So the way that I'd like to think about the value of the milk is that firstly, is there like a selling price that we have for milk in the market? Maybe like a fixed price that the sellers are able to sell the milk at.
Okay. So in the market that we're targeting in Uttar Pradesh, we know that on an average, milk sells at rupees 50 per liter.
All right,
Yeah.
great, great. Right. So Harshit, I'll just take a moment to think about how that would affect the value that essentially we can charge in the market to our customers. That's fine.
Sure, that works.
Yeah. Uh, right, Harshit. So what I can essentially see is that assuming that the estimate that we run as to more effective, how much more our product is effective vis-a-vis the competitor's product. What I can essentially say is that if we produce 6 liters of additional milk for 10 days, we'd essentially be able to produce 60 liters of additional milk. And given the selling price of milk is 50 rupees, the farmer, by purchasing our cow feed, will be able to generate 3,000 rupees of extra value vis-a-vis what the competitor is
Sorry,
supplying.
how did you get to
So,
60?
right. So, given that we are producing 6 liters of milk, right, every day for the next 10 days, that tells me that I'll
So,
be
so the
generating
increase
six.
in, sorry, So the increase in yield is 6 liters of milk per 10 days. So for every 10 days, we
Oh,
observed
all
the
right. Got
increase
it.
in, yeah. So I think,
Fair enough. So
yeah,
I
yeah,
essentially will not be multiplying this by 10.
yeah, yeah.
Right. Great. Right. So in that case, the additional value that we'll be generating would be 300, if I'm correct.
6 liters of milk per 10 days. So on a monthly level, do you want to check those calculations again, maybe?
Yeah, I'll just take a moment to go
Yeah.
back to them. All right. So I think I did make a small error over here. So I think our cow feed is lasting for about 30 days.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the idea is that for 10 days it's 6 liters, but that
Perfect.
effect will continue to last over the course of a month.
Hmm.
Right. So essentially, I think what we'll do over here, if I can go back to my calculation, it should be 6 into 30 upon 10.
All right.
Right. And
Perfect. Yeah.
yeah, if I essentially do the calculations over here, that'll give me a value of 900.
Okay.
What we essentially know is that our competitors are charging a price of 950 in the market.
All right.
So if on top of that, I add the value that the customer will be able to generate if they buy our product,
Mhm.
I come up with a price of 1850. So I feel that we can charge a price up to 1850 in the market and still be able to generate a profit since the threshold that we set for ourselves is 1100.
Okay. Perfect. And what would your final recommendation be? I understand 1100 is the lower threshold and 1850 is the maximum threshold, including the value.
Right,
What would your
right.
recommendation be? Where should you?
Right. So my final recommendation would be to charge a price closer to the upper threshold.
Okay.
However, the only caveat over there would be that I think we'd have to take some form of initiatives to make sure that the end consumer, which is the farmer, knows about the value proposition that our product is offering. Since, as you said, cow feed is probably seen as a commodity in the market,
Yep.
but we're actually delivering some additional value on top of that.
Right. But just as an alternative, sorry,
Yeah.
let's say farmers might not directly see the value in quantitative terms, right? They might not be able to realize that we're giving you an extra 900 rupees worth of value. So would you
Right.
recommend charging, let's say, directly 1850, or would you probably bring this down to about something like a range of 1600 or 1700, where you're able to gain maybe, let's say, a certain margin over our cost? Let's say if you were
Right.
to charge it 1600, you'll be
Right.
able to gain a 60% market margin over your cost, and but also be
Yeah.
competitive enough.
Right. No, I think that's a fair point, Harshit. Plus, I also do feel that this is a product where we see a lot of repeat usage if the farmer sees value with respect to what we're delivering. So
Okay.
I think we need not necessarily stay at the upper limit. We can maybe operate in the middle as you suggested.
All right. Sounds good. Fine. I think we can close the case here. Thanks, Jatin. It was great interacting with you.
Great. Great. Thanks a lot, Harshit. Likewise.
All right. Great job on the case, Jatin. I think it was a good analysis through and through. But let's delve into, let's say, some finer things, and maybe we can go through the case, and I'll share my feedback as we go through it. Right. Let's just start with the let's start with the preliminary questions, right? I think they were good enough to understand the problem in at least what the problem required. This problem, but in some parts, I felt it could have been more exhaustive to show the partner that we're really thinking about the problem as a whole, right? So let's say understanding the problem in a bit more detail through questions such as why particularly Uttar Pradesh, right? The client has only developed this product for the Uttar Pradesh market and not even for the Indian market as a whole. So just getting those kind of insights and showing the partner that you're thinking beyond just pricing the product and trying to understand the client in more detail really shows that uh, I think you're going beyond just the very limited problem statement, right? Similarly, for the sake of exhaustiveness, you could have asked more questions about the client per se, right? Since they're based in Sweden, what is the kind of market position they hold there? What is the value chain that they operate in? Some of these questions might not really help you answer the problem statement at hand, but if you have the time and if you can maybe get these answered in a couple, maybe in a half a minute, these really add maybe some brownie points to your case, right? You could have also asked about the competition at the very start. Again, you asked this question at the right moment later when we were pricing the product, but could also ask it at the very start. So, but again, no right or wrong way about it, right? Uh, Fair. Let's now jump to the case itself. Sorry, right before we jump onto the case, one very small hygiene check, right? Uh, when I gave you the problem statement, you said, let me think of any clarifying questions I might have, right? I would, again, nothing particularly wrong with this, but let's say as a hygiene factor, I would suggest using jargons like, let me think of any clarifying questions, let me think of any preliminary questions. What this might give an impression to the partner is that you almost, let's say, you're almost memorized the approach that, okay, I need to think of preliminary questions, ask those preliminary questions. Seems very formulaic, right? Uh, what I would suggest is just being more conversational and saying things like, let me understand the problem further and maybe we can discuss this or something along those lines, right? Typically avoid just using those words like clarifying questions, preliminary questions, right? Verbatim. All right. Coming on to the case itself. Okay, so we went through the three forms of pricing, right? We discussed the cost-based pricing first, and you were drawing out the value chain where you basically, let's say, categorize it into three broad headers, right? Production, distribution, and something like a marketing or a consumer group. I feel that maybe there you could have been a little more exhaustive and articulate in the value chain, right? You could have started with, um, okay, fine, production is fine. Maybe you could have included procurement, but I think that's covered in production. You could have talk about distribution, retailing, marketing in a little bit more detail, uh, just to make sure that you've got all your bases covered and you've got the value chain exactly as what is intended in the case. Right? Always better to kind of understand that thoroughly rather than to make certain assumptions or be, let's say, broad, operate on a broader level. All right, coming on to the cost-based pricing, we discussed the cost-based pricing. I think even though our aim was not profitability, you probably could have taken care of the margin, right? Instead of me nudging you, okay, saying that hey, there's a margin or there's something else that needs to be considered, you should have maybe kind of asked that hey, is there a margin that I need to consider over and above this basic cost, right? Because even let's say as going forward, even if you're solving pricing cases where you only need to work on a cost-based pricing, there might also be a certain margin, certain basic margin that the client wants to inculcate in their pricing just to cover their basic cost, right? Even though their aim might not be profitability. All right. Coming on to the value-based pricing. So where you were breaking down the value into quantity and quantity, right? Good MECE structure, first of all, right? Good breakdown into quality, quantity. Okay, coming on to the quality, right? We discussed two things, milk yield and the shinier fur. Right. For the shinier fur, even good breakdown into how do you think of the shinier fur is, of course, you could think of it quantitatively, right? But in terms of qualitatively, good breakdown sense of, okay, it could either be when the cow is alive or it could be when the cow is dead, right? So good coherent structuring on that level. Of course, before we got to the final pricing, there was a bit of, let's say, miscommunication and bit of miscalculations in between. What I would suggest is, especially for pricing case where you're solving any kind of math or any other case for that matter, where you're solving any kind of math or doing mental math in front of your interviewer. I know it's a little tricky in the sense that you're doing it on paper and you're in a, let's say, in a case interview environment, right? But I would still suggest that you take some time, maybe take a couple of 15, 20 seconds extra, but make sure that you've got all your numbers correct. Recheck those calculations again. And particularly when you're doing calculations, also make sure that you've got your assumptions right. Uh, for example, let's say I said that there has been an increase in yield of 6 liters per 10 days, and you assumed it to be 6 liters per day for each of the 10 days, right? And that made a huge difference in the calculation. So just really make sure that you've got those numbers correct. Take some time if you want to, but just I wouldn't suggest, let's say, making mistakes in your basic calculations, right? All right. Of course, we got a final price range of 1100 to 1850. Uh, Again, there is no right or wrong answer. It's a very subjective question of whether the client wants to price it at the lower end or the higher end, right? But let's say as maybe a rule of thumb or as a best practice, if your client is not really looking to maximize profits and the goal is to go for market share, maybe you can look at pricing it somewhere in the middle range, middle price range, right? Doesn't really make sense to price it at 1850 when your goal is to get a market share and not, let's say, gain profitability, right? Could be maybe like in this case, you could have priced it maybe around 1500 or 1600, like I said, while getting a 50-60% margin, but also being competitive enough to, let's say, make headways into that market, right? All right, I think apart from that, like I said, job well done, right? Good case analysis. We, of course, got to the final solution, right? That's it. Thanks, Jatin.